Hey everyone, welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. As always, we have a great guest on today, and this is going to be one that you are definitely going to want to maybe pull your husband or your wife in to listen with, because we have someone on the show today that I think is really going to open your eyes up to a lot of things that homeschool parents tend to sometimes not really know what's going on the other side of those schoolroom walls. We have Dr. Duke Pesta on today. He is the director of FreedomProject Academy. He's host of the Dr. Duke Show podcast and a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. That's a mouthful. His experience as an educational reformer, university professor, and high school teacher uniquely qualify him to address the current state of education in our country. He speaks across the nation on topics including the necessity of homeschooling, the decline of morality and critical thinking in public schools, and the myriad of ways that colleges and universities indoctrinate students. He is one of America's foremost authorities on the dangers of Common Core and the federal takeover of education. He hosts his own weekly program about education, the Dr. Duke Show, which covers educational issues from preschool through graduate school. Dr. Duke, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Yes, well, it is an absolute honor to have you on. We were visiting Heidi St. John this past summer, filming for Schoolhouse Rocked. And actually, while we were at her house was when your episode aired. And she had talked about you and was so, she's just so impressed with who you are and the knowledge that you have of the public education system and all things going on in culture having to do with education. I mean, of course, you know a whole lot about many, many other things, not just education. But so I heard you on her podcast after she had spoken of you, and I thought, man, we've got to get this guy on the podcast. Talk about what you do, because again, you are, I like that you're labeled kind of the educational reformer, and that's really what Schoolhouse Rocked is. You know, the full title of the movie is Schoolhouse Rocked: The Homeschool Revolution, and it really is a revolution because we need to reform education and not just in our country, but worldwide. Why are we in need of a reformation right now when it comes to education?
Well, I mean, anybody who's involved with education who is not trying to reform it is part of the problem. We have an educational system that is getting worse and worse. I think if you ask me in one sentence to explain the major problem, it is the following: that our progressive educrats, it's the progressive left who's been in charge of our public schools, our colleges, for going on 50, 60 years now. And what they have succeeded in doing now, over the last 25 years in particular, is transforming the way we educate our kids, whether it's public schools from kindergarten through high school, whether it's our universities, to educate them primarily first for left-wing ideological purposes, right? What you and I would call the social justice movement. We have relegated academic achievement, merit, hard work. We have relegated real serious study to all of these political objectives of the left, which is why our kids know less and less and less the farther they go along, but are much more politicized. So you've got these kids on college campuses who can't tell you who their senator is, who don't know the three branches of government, can tell you nothing about the Constitution, yet they know America is a racist, sexist, evil place, and that capitalism and free markets have to go. What we've seen happen is a hijacking of the schools by ideology and leftist politics at the expense of real learning. And it's really starting to transform this country into something very different than what it was meant to be.
Yeah, it's all about indoctrination and no longer about education. And that's a scary place to be. And you talk about being involved in reformation on the end of education. And we just got back from a camping trip actually yesterday. And I was talking to one of the dads there, and we had such an interesting conversation because we were talking about, you know, as homeschoolers, sometimes we feel like, well, our kids are protected. And so we're good. You know, we can just close that door. We don't worry about the education of our kids because we've taken it into our own hands, which obviously is what we stand on as a family. It's why we're making a movie about it. It's why we do a podcast and a blog and all that stuff, because we feel like it's important for parents to take that role of educating our children. However, it can't stop there. It needs to continue on. And we were talking about, you know, our tax dollars are going to pay. They're paying for all of these other children to be indoctrinated, and these children are the ones who are our future, the future of our country, our future political leaders, our future doctors, lawyers. And we're seeing this crazy shift. I mean, sometimes I feel, and I know you feel this way too, I'm sure, like I'm in the twilight zone. I'm like, I hear the things that are happening in universities and in the schools, you know, private schools, public schools, public schools K through 12. We're from California, and I sometimes I literally cannot wrap my mind around the things that are being taught to these children. How did we get here? How did we get to this point where people are having the freedom, because it really has become a freedom for them to be able to indoctrinate our kids with these horrible, horrific, wicked ideas, and have turned so far away from the truth of God? How did we get to this place, and what do we do? How do we get back to where we came from?
Well, to start with the first part of your question, it was very clear that Christ in the Gospels wants us to be in the world, but not of the world. On one hand, we have to protect our kids, our families, our communities in a Christian way. On the other hand, we have to turn outward to a corrupt culture. We can't ignore it, or it's going to swallow us up. We have to prioritize protecting the faith, but we also have to reach out into the world. And so many homeschool moms and dads, I think you're right. They think that their kids are safe, that by pulling out of the schools, they fix the problem. They really haven't, because not only are we paying for it with our taxpayer dollars, but we are sowing the seeds of our own destruction, because as these kids become more, and there's still way more, like 9.5 out of every 10 school kids are public school kids. And so as they become more indoctrinated, more secular, they're convinced now that God was never meant to be a part of the culture, that our Constitution somehow banishes God from public spaces. These are the lies our kids are being told. And as they get older and older, and the generation that leaves college becomes the millennials, 54% of millennials believe in some sort of some kind of a occult behavior, right? They believe in tarot cards, they believe in astrology. 54% of them believe in sort of occult spirituality, and less than 50% actually believe in God. And that's going to come back to bite us. You and me can homeschool our kids, but will your kids be able to homeschool theirs? We've already seen California, the state you ran away from, wisely got out of. California is trying to put the screws to homeschoolers. They're trying to force state agents into homeschool families to kind of watch and see what's going on, and this is beginning to spread. So that's the first part of your question, I think. And how we got here is really kind of basic, it seems to me. Our churches have stopped fighting this battle. The churches have become, I argue that the institutional Christianity, church Christianity, is on life support in this country because they don't want to stay, that 501c3, I can't say how many pastors I've met who've told me, gee, Dr. Pesta, we'd love to have you speak here, but I've got 4 public school teachers in my congregation. I can't upset them, right? And so all of this temerity on the refusal of our Christian pastors to actually wade into this, to take a side, because if they were doing that, if our Christian pastors were doing it, they would ultimately be telling the moms and dads, you've got to get your kid out of these schools. You're not going to be able to fix them. And so the first thing, sorry for being long-winded, but the first answer to your question is, you got to get them out. If we're going to fix any of this, many, many more American kids have to be educated outside of that system. And it's happening, but not fast enough.
Yes, I agree with you completely. We often have people ask us, we're trying to fundraise for this movie just to get through post-production. And we have had many, many people ask us, well, have you gone to churches? And we've said, we've talked to pastors before, and churches will not touch this movie because it is a movie about homeschooling. And it's the same exact thing, is that they don't want to offend people because they've got people, on their leadership board or, elders, deacons, whatever, some pastors who are part of their church who have their kids in public school, and they don't want to ruffle their feathers. They don't want to, and even people in the congregation as well. They don't want to upset people. And I don't understand that, because I'm thinking, well, if you're standing up and you're teaching the truth of God's word, we often talk about Luke 6:40. It says, the student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. Well, who's teaching our kids? And are we the ones who are coming alongside and teaching them and discipling their hearts? Again, Deuteronomy 6, we talk about that all the time. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and teach this to your children when they rise and when they sleep and, when they walk about their day. We can't do these things if we don't, we can't teach our children the way that they need to be taught if they're not with us. And when we're sending them to a public institution, a government school, for 40 hours a week, they're being taught by someone else who is not their parent and who doesn't have their best interest in mind. Now, there are teachers, of course, you and I both know, I mean, you've taught in the public school system. There are teachers who love kids, genuinely love their students, but their hands are tied and there's nothing that they can do about it. What are you seeing? Because obviously California, I know a whole lot about what's going on in California because that's home for us. What are you seeing as far as what's happening in the California and kind of whole left coast part of the world? How is that infiltrating into the rest of the nation? And what changes are you seeing even in these so-called conservative states and towns?
Yeah, to start with where you started, I think it always amazes me when I read the Gospels. Christ spoke to the power. He spoke to the churches, basically, spoke to the synagogues, told them the truth. It made them uncomfortable.
Yep.
And then you had the great divide. And here we are, the heirs of Christ, and we won't speak to the culture. We won't speak to the moms and dads in our parish or our constituency because, hey, they got kids in the wrong place. And if priests and ministers, if pastors can't tell their parents, you're sending your kids to not just a godless place, but an anti-God place because you fear your 501c3. That shows you the state we're in, right? That our biggest ally should be biblical Christians, should be Bible-believing Christians. And when the ministers who lead those congregations will not stand up for the truth, then we really can't be surprised where we are. But you mentioned California, because there is so little opposition, California, what few Republicans remained in the state have been more or less completely elected out of office. It's been a landslide for far leftist politicians. And this is, of course, fueled by a huge base of illegal immigrants, many of whom are finding ways to vote. And what's happening is that there's no balance here. There's really are no longer any checks and balances in California. Right. So because they've got basically super majorities to pass any radical agenda item they want to, they're doing it, right?
Right.
Even in places like New York City, where they've passed these radical abortion laws where you're allowed to abort babies while they're in the process of being born.
Yeah.
And so the left has run away, and then we know what the progressive left is. They're atheist or secularist. They are very sympathetic to communism. They do not like freedom and liberty. They don't like the Constitution. They don't like American history and values. And Christianity is at the core of what they don't like. They see Christianity in 250 years of American history and 2,000 years of Western culture as the root of all evil in terms of repression and backwardness. So we're seeing this problem. And the problem with California is that there are a lot of states in the union that aren't as progressive, that still have more of a balance in legislature, who are using California as an excuse to do it themselves. And there's places like Massachusetts and New Jersey and New York and Chicago, the District of Chicago. So these big liberal cities are incorporating this stuff and using their power, the big cities inside states, to transform how state business is done as well. So this is spreading. It's a virus. And what you see in California today, you're going to see in Nebraska. You're going to see in North Carolina tomorrow, unless somebody turns this around.
Yeah, that's right. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about this. Okay, take a quick drink.